My name's Kirk Hope, the CEO of the Financial Services Council. Welcome to this webinar, which is Connecting with Kiwis, Strategies for Reaching New Zealand's Diverse Consumer Groups. It's great to have you all here. The financial services sector has made significant strides in providing resources aimed at enhancing financial literacy and ensuring that it reaches diverse audiences and is accessible. But is it reaching the right people? The financial services sector is united in growing the financial confidence and well-being of New Zealanders, yet we frequently face challenges in encouraging consumers to engage effectively with these resources. So this webinar is really about helping unlock and unpick some of that stuff. We're really lucky to have a great group of speakers, including our facilitator, Meagan, who's the Chief Marketing Officer from Momentum Life, Lee McCauley, who's a behavioural science expert and the founder and director at TIC Consulting, and Sophia Golfinopoulos, who's an author and content creator, and Matt Macpherson, who's the General Manager, Super and Funds at Sharesies. I'm going to hand over now to Meagan Tuckerman, who's going to facilitate the webinar. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kurt. As Kirk said, we're here today to do a webinar on connecting with Kiwis, strategies for reaching New Zealand's diverse consumer groups. Thank you all for joining on this what is very gloriously sunny Thursday afternoon here in Auckland. As Kirk said, my name is Meagan Tuckerman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Momentum Life, and I'm also the co-chair of the Consumer Engagement Committee for the FSC, and I'll be facilitating the session today. As Kurt said, with me today we have Lee McCauley, and from TIC Consulting, an expert in behavioural science, Sophia Golfinopoulos. She's an author, a content creator, and the mind behind Mindful with Money NZ. Look, I took a look at that recently, and if you haven't followed Sophia yet and you're really interested in financial education, please do. It's well worth your time. And then we have Matt Macpherson, our last panellist, the General Manager, Super and Funds at Sharesies, and he'll be bringing insights into financial empowerment through innovation. Today's webinar, we're going to be discussing the changing face of New Zealand and what this means for how we connect and educate consumers, the critical role that trust, accessibility, and technology plays in educating and enhancing financial literacy, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A. Let's get started. I thought we'd kick things off with you, Lee, thinking about what key behavioural shifts affect financial services consumers in New Zealand. What are your thoughts?
Well, challenging question to start with. Thank you. I guess there are a couple of things that I'd throw in initially as a kind of, I guess, behavioural expert and thinking about very much with that behavioural lens, applying that. So I think the first thing is there's a lot of focus and a lot of talk about things like literacy or capability, but actually what we fundamentally care about is about financial behaviour. And so thinking about that, thinking about your different, the different cohorts, different groups, and perhaps instead of thinking about them in demographic or other kind of more traditional quota or buckets, instead thinking about them more in terms of their behaviours. So what, the propensity to borrow or save, or whether people spend, etc., and taking that kind of lens to them. I also think that we have a kind of a challenge, all of us, in thinking about, the financial sector is very much based on quite traditional kind of product sets and service offerings, and how do we persuade people to engage with them and to engage with that content, rather than how do we design things that are for those people? How do we connect and engage with them and explore what might work better for them, rather than just assuming that our product is the answer and working from that end? So yeah, just a couple of, I guess, initial thoughts on that.
So if we take it to Matt and Sophia, I guess you're at the forefront of actually trying to make some of this financial change and educate people. Have you got a few examples of like things you've done or how you engage people around that behavioural change?
Before we even got started with our KiwiSaver work, we did a lot of research, and maybe it's emblematic of some of that change that Lee was talking about, but when we started talking to people about KiwiSaver, they said, "Oh yeah, overall we're really happy, but here's a couple of things that we don't like. We don't feel like we have enough control over where my money's invested and what it's being used for." And that people really wanted to like connect in with what their money was being invested in. So, I think that's a change that we're seeing. The move towards sort of ethical investing and dealing with ethical brands is really important. And also, people wanted to understand how it worked, right? So, we live in an age of really low trust. More and more of us are trusting less and less. And in financial services, that the whole model of leave it to the professional doesn't cut it for everyone. Some people actually want to understand what's inside an organisation and how they're doing things for them to trust it.
Perfect. Sophia, what about you? You're sort of at a slightly different angle because obviously you are on channels where people engage in social. What are you seeing and what do they engage with?
Well, behavior-wise, part of my aim is to help younger people become more open-minded about certain things. There are a lot of myths around, and I hear these because I used to work in customer service, and so I would hear New Zealanders say the same things over and over again. One of the things was when I worked at IRD, a lot of people had this misconception that every New Zealander paid a third of their income in tax. And so in my book and also on my Instagram, I lay out the calculations that show that most New Zealanders actually pay close to a fifth of their income in tax, not a third. So that's shown in the calculations to help them. And the other misconception is life insurance. A lot of people say, I don't need life insurance because my family can just sell the house. But a lot of people don't realize that on average, it takes 44 days to sell a house. That's if you're lucky and don't need to do repairs and maintenance and make it look all nice first. But a funeral usually has to be paid for within 7 days. So if you don't have that funeral fund, like $30,000, which is normally what it can cost up to, then you need 44 days to sell your house, but you need to pay for it within 7 days. So just things like that.
So when we're thinking about behavioural change, and I guess it's a little bit what you said, Lee, we often put labels on segments. We, talk about, hey, Gen Z are not concerned. Oh my word! All millennials have a certain approach. How can this affect what you do? Might pass to you, Lee. Quickly try and get myself back.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess one question I'd ask myself, I'd ask a client if I was working with a financial service provider, is like what do you know, and where are the gaps? And so often we kind of reach for data we already have. We know our customer base. We don't necessarily think about, well, who's missing from that, who's not represented. And then thinking about like what are the ways that you might, if you think there's an opportunity, if you think there's potential somewhere, then, well, how do we go about building our knowledge base on that, reaching out to that group, that set of consumers, and finding out what works for them. And I guess one thing that I would be very kind of almost evangelical about is trying to use mixed methods research in that. So trying to combine things like data with qualitative research, with getting out there and seeing what are people doing, or kind of working alongside them. And that's often a kind of missing bit of customer research. We ask people, we survey them, or we work with our existing kind of customer base, rather than that kind of proactive engagement, I guess, and developing products with that end in mind. Or we then throw it to, the IT department to design something that we think we've got the parameters for, but we haven't necessarily nailed it for that group and for that set of people.
So thinking about that, what are the watch outs, I guess, again, Matt and Sophia, from what you're doing, what are the watch outs that people should look out for when they're trying to connect with these different types of groups and educate them? Are there any things they should avoid? Are there any things they should really consider?
I think a lot of people are turning to social media and Facebook groups, especially for advice, which is quite dangerous sometimes because I've been part of social groups like, there's a group called Cheaper Living New Zealand, for example, and sometimes people will ask a question, like a financial question, and people will just completely answer the wrong thing. Whereas the best thing to do is just to check the website. For example, eligibility criteria for working for families, how to apply for something. Sometimes people will just say straight up, you're not eligible, but they are. And that would cost someone a lot of money. So, yeah, I would say always go to the relevant government website to check your information and don't always rely 100% on other people's opinions on social media.
Yeah, I think there's so much more information out there now, and there's great information, and there's misinformation, I think we call it these days. And so people, especially younger people, I think they're seeking out financial education. They're looking at lots of different places. Maybe that compares to a couple of generations ago where you probably went and sat with an advisor or a bank manager or something. There's so much information out there, but yeah, like Sophia said, I think it's really important to understand the difference, sources of information, and make sure you're looking in the right place.
So when we think about that, we've got people engaged and they're talking about money and their finances, but we know New Zealanders actually don't like to do that. There's a lot of research that says actually New Zealanders feel really uncomfortable with talking about money. I guess from your experience, and that's Lee, Matt, Sophia, how have you engaged New Zealanders, or what could we do more, I guess, as a financial community to help people's attitudes toward money and make them feel more comfortable having those conversations?
Well, I guess, that social dynamic's really important, right? We do look to our peers and, key tenet of behavioral science is the importance of social norms in driving behavior. It's what do others expect that we'll do, and what do we think other people are doing? Sometimes a bit of myth busting there can be helpful. But we saw in COVID, for example, lots of people asking, what should I do about my Kiwi saver? And particularly young people kind of locking down their savings and going to more conservative funds, and I think the financial sector and the FMAs, the regulator, were quite slow to respond to that, and people were sort of reacting at a much faster pace than I think the sector was ready for. And so yeah, we can't get away from the power of those social dynamics. So how do we think about and anticipate some of that stuff, or get ready to think about who are the influencers? And maybe Sophia has all those answers, being one herself. But I think people will make those decisions based on what feels kind of right for them, and potentially without taking that more kind of considered advice. So we do need to help people, and that's where things like rules of thumb and giving people heuristics to kind of work with, rather than necessarily sort of deep financial knowledge, is probably going to be more effective than that 10-page leaflet that we might send out.
Lee, I'll probably go to you. This is a really interesting one when we think about KiwiSaver. It's in the news a lot, but do people really understand what KiwiSaver is? And I guess it's a little bit from your experience at Sharesies. What have you done in this space? Because I know Sharesies, you've done a lot with helping people understand and reaching a really broad group of individuals who wouldn't necessarily have been engaging with financial education before. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure. Dangerous to talk in absolutes, right? There's ranges of people, segments that still think that KiwiSaver is a savings account at KiwiBank. There's other people who have got really deep knowledge, right? So different levels. Overall, I think it's pretty well understood. One thing I think that we've learned is people understand the difference between growth balanced and conservative quite well. The people that we've researched were able to articulate what type of sort of risk appetite they had, not by telling us what their risk appetite was, but by telling us that they are interested in growth, balance, or conservative, which is a great proxy for it anyway. And yeah, I mean, we believe in education, and we spend a lot of time committed to education. We use a lot of different channels to connect with people in different ways. But there's a great analogy which I might have even be pinching off Lee, that when it comes to like financial literacy, if you take the comparison to understanding exercise, right? We all know that we should go to the gym if we want to be healthier. I don't need more education to make me go to the gym. I need someone to make going to the gym easier, and I will go to the gym more often. And so we believe in education, but we also believe in removing barriers. And in financial services, there's a lot of barriers for a lot of people. And people in the business I'm in the industry I'm in, have traditionally felt kind of priced out and jargoned out and kind of locked out of participating. And you need that education and that action coming together for behavioural change to be sustainable, and for people to grow more confident about their money. And when you're confident, you'll talk, and when you'll talk, you'll have a long-term, a far better outcome, is the belief that we have at our company anyway.
Yes, about Sharesies, I love that you guys show how the simple return is calculated. When I go into my Sharesies app, you can see the simple return, but it doesn't just say what it is. It actually explains what it is as well for people who don't know what it is and how it's calculated.
Sophia, I guess one of the things we think about as we think about people understanding their money a little bit better, we often, we've done a lot of research and we've had a look at the different groups and individuals that are tailored for. And a really interesting piece of research we did in the Consumer Engagement Committee showed there's lots tailored now for children and schools, with schools programs coming through. There was a reasonable amount for sort of slightly older adults. I guess we're talking sort of 30 plus, but there definitely seems to be a big gap for people in that, I guess, 18 to 25-year-old area, where they were too old for the schools programs because they've gone through and they've come through afterwards, and they're a bit young to engage with some of the other content. For that group, how do you think we get them interested in understanding their money, financial literacy? What sort of approaches can we take, I guess, as a broader industry to try and, get them involved and even interested in money?
Well, I like to normalize talking about money so that it is simple and it's fun and interesting. So I remember when I was that age, I thought it was too complicated for me because there was so much jargon. So something that I like to do is really simplify. So on my Instagram, on my book, for example, you won't find a lot of jargon, and it's in very simple language. And everything in my book is about introducing people to the basic financial concepts. If someone was entering the workforce, they know all the simple things about how to get car insurance, how income tax works, all of that.
Yeah. And Lee, Matt, as an industry, how do you think we can engage more with that group? Sort of what ideas or thoughts have you got, Lee, maybe from a behavioural aspect that, might help us engage, whether it was about KiwiSaver or insurance? What could we do?
Get out there. For a start, get out of your office, and talk to people. Now, I think there's a lot potentially you could do. You also have to be realistic that at that age, a lot of people don't have tons of disposable income, or if they do, they're probably going to be enjoying their life with it rather than salting it away for their retirement or whatever. Or persuading them to do that is quite an uphill task. But there are potentially products that could be useful for them, and even just getting them to engage with their KiwiSaver, for instance, if they've been defaulted into one through signing, being signed up when they start work. Well, signing up's one thing, but could they be putting more money aside? Are they thinking about that in terms of, a house deposit? I think there is also a question though, like, does that detract from the purpose of KiwiSaver if some people are doing it for saving for a deposit of a house and withdrawing quite soon, and other people are looking to build it for the long term? But yeah, I think there's a lot you can do to sort of get out there and engage, but also they may not be the people who are the best opportunity for this kind of stuff relative to other cohorts or other groups.
Yeah, I'd just pitch in and say really important that it's not condescending, and sometimes some of the messages I think going out to that age group can be received in a kind of a condescending way. And just to back up, Lee's point, people probably think about their insurance or their KiwiSaver around 15 minutes per annum, I would say on average. It's a made-up stat, but you can quote me on that. And so, they've got far more important things to deal with, probably going on at the stage. So I guess making sure that you're not only like pushing information, but you're also, that companies are creating areas where people can go and self-serve in that 15 minutes when they've got that motivation type thing.
I guess so far we've sort of talked about younger people. And what we need to, what we recognise is obviously New Zealand's a hugely multicultural society with many different ethnic groups. How have you engaged with those different groups in New Zealand? Matt, Sophia, or Lee, any ideas you have that, would really help us, I guess, engage in a culturally sensitive way that makes sense to individual groups in society as well?
Yeah, I think there's certain things that companies, organisations that are successful at doing this exhibit, and there's kind of three that come to mind. And one is, I guess, internally they believe in the advantages of diversity. They're aware of their biases. They have strategies to mitigate them. They try and construct their workforce to represent the customers that they want to serve. And if they want to serve all of New Zealand, then they want to make sure that they've got people in their company that can think like all the people of New Zealand, essentially. Yeah, I think it's an important one, the internal side. Externally, you've also got to match that. There's nothing more jarring than a internal-external brand clash where we're telling the public we love our customers and then we provide really terrible customer service, for example, is something that customers see through. So that matching of internal-external brand, I mentioned it earlier on, but we live in this age of trust, and the age of trust is that we don't trust as much. A lot of scams, financial services is a particularly untrustworthy industry. So that's something to think about when it comes to your external brand. And then the products and services that you're actually, manufacturing and you're providing to people. I think we always need to think about making them engaging, but also ensuring that they're designed to remove barriers and biases again. So it's kind of like the three parts working in harmony. I don't think you can be successful. I don't think any successful company don't have those three attributes.
Sophia, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have much experience with ethnicity with my audience because I have information based on their age and location and gender, but not ethnicity.
Yeah. Matt, great point around trust, and I just want to circle back on that one. Look, it's something that's talked about all the time with financial services that, people more broadly don't have a great deal of trust in, whether it's banks, whether it's insurance companies, we haven't created that trust as a broader industry. I guess this is one of those 1 in 100 questions. How do you think we can work as an industry on improving that trust with individuals in New Zealand?
We put a lot of thought into the way we design our products. We test them a lot with customers. I think that helps. I think great design is something that, successful companies invest in. Financial services, the products are actually relatively commoditized, so the experience and the service is really important. And a lot of user testing and accessibility testing and make sure that the software works, for everyone on, people who can't afford the latest iPhone, that it still works on older devices, that it still works on desktop computers. for example, is something that we do. But yeah, I mean, to Lee's point, getting out, actually talking to your customers, I think is really important. Creates trust. And we're a digital company, we're proud of being a digital company, but we're also small enough that we still call every customer that signs up to our scheme and ask for feedback and try and have a chat. And it's really interesting. A lot of people don't answer the phone because they just see an unknown number come up, but those that do, we think that helps us to understand what they want better and to be able to broaden our understanding of what our customers want from us.
I think trust definitely still needs to be built. I still work in the financial services industry, and a lot of people still think that, I'm scamming them when I call them. But if they say, I don't know who you are, or I don't trust that you're who you say you are, I just suggest that, I end the call and they can call us back on the publicly listed phone number. So I'm just fine with that because I know people are very wary at the moment. And the other one just goes back to before, just helping people to understand that entities like IRD are not looking to scam you. They're very neutral, and they actually issue many refunds as much as they issue bills. So they're not specifically, malicious and here to steal your money.
Thanks. If we think about accessibility, how can financial products and services be designed to be more inclusive and accessible for those with varying literacy or technology skills? This goes a little bit back to what you said, Matt, around testing on different types of devices. But, what do we do if you've got someone older or someone, younger or doesn't have access to technology? How do you think we could improve and be more inclusive in our approach?
I might jump in here. It's going to echo a bit what Matt was just saying, though. That a lot of the barriers can just be around things like jargon, and a kind of shrouding of the key bits of information. There's a concept of operational transparency, which a great example of that is, if you're waiting for something to download and you see the little circle or you see kind of how far it's going, even if it takes longer, it feels less stressful because you can kind of see where you are in the process. And I think there's a lot missing from a lot of kind of traditional financial service products that allows you to easily understand what you're buying, what you're going to get, the terminology, what does trauma cover mean if you're in insurance? And also, how do you compare one product with another one as well? And, to give customers that confidence that they're buying the right thing for them. There is potentially a question here around business models where you've got kind of brokers and people incentivized to sell stuff. Is that the right model for some of these as well? I think, is definitely something to think about if you're trying to connect with particular groups. Then if you're relying on a kind of middle agent to do that for you, then maybe that business model is not going to work, which obviously I guess Sharesies doesn't really do that. So, they are a disruptor from that point of view.
That brings us to the types of technology in question coming in. What platforms do you think we could be using to engage audiences in money discussions, and how are they engaging? I guess you're probably the perfect person, Sophia, to start with this one about what sort of platforms you see and you're using to engage with customers.
Yeah, Instagram is very popular because people like both written posts and video posts because it just makes it really quick and easy to understand, and people have short attention spans. So something that's very easy to process, easy to read, that usually gets the most views and most attention.
If we're thinking about video, what have you found with the video length? What sort of length now are people really engaging with?
Oh, they're normally up to 30 seconds or so, something very quick.
Yeah. And Matt, at Sharesies, what sort of approaches and what sort of platforms do you use to engage with people beyond the Sharesies app?
Yeah, our Share Club is a pretty thriving community of like-minded people, and that's been going for a while. Facebook itself is not necessarily, kind of a growth platform, I don't think, but Share Club certainly is popular. Reddit, really fast growing platform for financial topics in particular. I mean, Wall Street Bets, Personal Finance New Zealand's not bad. But yeah, quite like Reddit. We launched a podcast earlier on this year. I've got to try and remember my years. And we realised that no one had ever done a podcast on KiwiSaver before, which was kind of interesting in a way. And what was more interesting that we didn't see coming is it actually went to #1 on the Apple Store in like the first week. So there was a real demand out there, people wanting to understand more about KiwiSaver. In a podcast is a great format for a lot of people who are on their way to work or time to kill or whatever. So yeah, that's another one. But I mean, we don't know what's coming next. This is a constant cycle of new platforms. So I guess look, let's be honest, most financial advice comes from friends and families. There are other important platforms, but also give a plug to the independent websites. I think Sorted's great. Their calculators, that the way they explain stuff is brilliant. So yeah, there's heaps of platforms, I guess.
And I think you hit it on the head then. We don't know what's coming, but this is the blue sky question for all of you. When we think about what are the emerging sort of challenges you think or opportunities that can be coming our way in terms of fostering that financial inclusion and education in New Zealand?
I think it's just continuing to normalize talking about finances, because years ago, there wasn't a huge financial community. And on Instagram now, I'm always seeing people with new Instagram accounts that are basically talking about their finances. A lot of them are anonymous, and they will share, they'll be very transparent and share exactly what's in their savings account, what's in their emergency fund, what their goals are. And so even anonymously, people are more comfortable with just sharing their financial situation. And the more we talk about it, the more it's normalized, and the more people become informed about, financial institutions, how things work, instead of being misinformed. So I see that as a really positive change.
I think I'd go back to the point I made before, like thinking about what are those heuristics, those mental shortcuts people can use for making decisions, and rather than relying on them having, sort of an NCA level, whatever qualification in financial capability or some such thing. Our day-to-day, we often go through kind of, fast automatic decision making. We've got lots on. And Matt said earlier, people give, 15 seconds thought. Okay, so when's a good time to get hold of people? And, how can we spur people to think about it in the right way at that point? And so equipping them with the kind of those tools, those shortcuts to get them to make those decisions at that moment is I think a really exciting opportunity.
I'm just going to go to a bit of Q&A now. The first one, does the regulation of financial services, especially around provision of information, help or hinder regulated financial services communicating clearly with customers where they at? So yeah, that question's asking, with all the regulation we have, what's that doing with our communication with customers?
So I think from my perspective on KiwiSaver, it's probably one of the most heavily sort of regulated areas of a pretty heavily regulated industry. No, I don't think it's getting in the way. But what I would say is that I think if you look at what the disclosure is trying to do and what the key points it's trying to communicate, we should, we have to do that. It's all important stuff, but also take those points and put it into your experience. And so people are actually picking up that information as they are using your product, and you don't rely on a disclosure statement that's given when they first acquire the product, or a quarterly fund update that you don't ever send them and is published to a website. Take that information and provide it to customers in a way that they see and they got access to at all times. Would be my thing, because what's in the disclosure obligations, the content is really good information and everyone should receive it. The format is, arguable whether or not a PDF is the right way to consume information, but the information itself is really good stuff.
So Matt, in the Sharesies space, are they doing anything different around the disclosures?
No, we meet all the obligations that we have to under the law, but when we look at things like fund updates for a KiwiSaver scheme, so every KiwiSaver scheme in New Zealand, every quarter it produces a fund update and it publishes it to a website which is part of the company's office called Disclose, and also has to publish it on their own website. The information that's in there relates to how the fund has performed over the quarter, and lots of great information, right? So we do that. We also take all that great information and we provide it to the customers in the digital experience where they're actually using the product. So we're not getting in the way of their life and making them read like several pages of information. We're taking the information and building it into the experience because we think the information is really good stuff.
Yeah. Any other feedback, Sophia, Lee?
I always make it clear that, sorry, Lee.
No, go on.
I always make it clear that, what I'm saying is not advice. And I think because a lot of my posts are they're not how to buy a house, but how I bought my house, then there's no need to say, oh, this is, official government information or not, because, it's quite clear that it's just my own personal money story. And also whenever I have money news posts, often I'll quote something from the government, then I will include the source. So if you go to any money news post, there's always the website linked at the very bottom so people can check their own information and their own sources so they know that it's reliable.
I've got a great Q&A here for you, Lee. You can lead this one. The question was, I'm interested in how to help people navigate all the financial decisions they need to make, the products to choose from, and the overwhelming information to choose from. Is there a degree of paralysis in decision-making and prioritization due to this?
Yeah, fantastic question. So there's a book, it's about 10 years old now, called Scarcity, which is a bit of a classic from sort of behavioural science literature, basically talking about what they describe as a kind of cognitive tax of actually being financially stressed. And we are naturally a little bit lazy and we do procrastinate anyway. And if you're stressed financially and if you've got a lot going on, you're probably not going to sit there and make the best long-term kind of level-headed and rational choices that you might otherwise make if you had a bit more capacity, time to engage, etc. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, it goes back to the point I said before about thinking about the timing to engage, and also how things are framed, giving people the choice. I will hold my hands up though as well. Many years ago, when we moved to New Zealand, I said to my other half, we must make a will now that we're here and we've got a kid and we better get on with it. And it took about 8 years from that discussion to actually getting into the lawyer's office and sorting it out. And I mean, we had the best of intentions, but the barriers, the hassle factor all got in the way. And I think we have to recognize that people are living busy lives and have lots of other things on, and we're competing for attention. So it's not always straightforward to get them in and ask them to consider what life's going to be like for them when they're 65 or whatever.
Yeah. Matt, lots of nodding from you. Do you have anything to add to this one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we see it all the time at our investing platform. We believe in providing as much access as we can to investment opportunities for people. We now have over, I think, 14,000 options that people can invest in. And that sounds great until you put someone in there for the first time and they're trying to work out which option to take. And, sadly, some people, that just becomes overwhelming and they exit and they don't ever get started. And, I think we know, like just getting started with a couple of dollars just gives you such a boost of confidence. And then, from there we sort of build and we get interested in stuff. I think actually it may have been on the question prior, but I guess I wanted to chip in and say I had to arrange some insurance recently, and I was really pleasantly surprised at how the disclosure and the policy wordings and things like that have improved from the last time I did it, which is probably years ago. I found it really like plain English written, really written with the customer in mind. And I think insurance is really a challenging one. Probably a lot of people from the insurance sector on the call. Man, they got a hard job trying to, communicate all that work to people.
Yeah. Sophia, I guess this one's for you again. If we just go back to the question around, I guess, creating bite-sized pieces of information, which is, a lot of what you're doing, and helping people, sort of avoid that paralysis with too much information, which is definitely a thing. What have you seen, or what sort of hints and tips can you have to people out there who are, going, hey, I'm working in a financial services company, I'm in an insurance company, how can I help create information that, people engage with, but isn't overwhelming? What tips have you got?
Well, I try and fit all my information into only a few slides and to make them really, really easy to read. Like one of my posts that was quite popular was about life insurance myths, and it just has 3 little bubbles on about dismissing 3 money myths about life insurance. So it's all on one page, even though I had to shorten it a lot. So made that really quick and easy. And also one of my very popular posts was signs that you're doing well financially. And I simplified that quite a lot. So instead of saying, oh, you have a 3-month emergency fund, I put it into the words of what it means for you. So I wrote, if you lost your job tomorrow, you could pay your living expenses for at least 3 months. The next slide is so instead of saying, oh, your income is more than your expenditure, then I put it as you spend less than you earn. So et cetera, et cetera. I always, instead of just naming, giving the name of something, assuming that someone knows what it is, I just turn it into the language of what it really means for you if this thing happened to you.
Perfect. Well, that's the end of our Q&A, unless anyone has any last-minute questions they'd like to put in the Q&A. What I'd like to do is to each panelist to go to you and sort of just thinking about the topic, connecting with Kiwis, strategies for reaching New Zealand's diverse consumer group. A sort of closing comment for each of you about what you think we can do in that space. Lee, shall we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm going to pick up on a point Matt was making earlier around the diversity of your own teams and your own workforces, and thinking about how representative are they of the customers that you're trying to reach, and how do you get those different perspectives in? How do you make sure that they are heard? Because quite often we end up in kind of organizational stovepipes or silos where the UX team does the customer experience bit and the software designers do another bit, and not necessarily kind of allowing that sort of cross-pollination and bringing those diversity of views, even from the people within your organization, let alone exploring and seeking them outside as well. And I would just finish with saying, yeah, absolutely, get out there and try and think about really, really critically and hard about what you want people to do. So, engaging with content isn't a behavior. It's more a kind of sentiment, but do you want them to actually do something? Do you want them to sign up for something? Do you want them to save some money or put some away or buy an insurance product or whatever? And the more you can be specific and concrete about those behaviors, then the more you can think about, well, what are the barriers in the way? How do we remove the jargon? How do we make this easy for them? How do we get them to a point where they will do the thing that we want them to do? And rather than assume that just because we've built something, they will come.
Yeah, truthful. Sophia, any closing comments from you?
I'd say to go back to, what I said before, to normalize talking about finance, but also to reach the diverse groups that have different diverse learning needs or not learning needs, but the way that they would prefer to learn. Like, for example, I am not a really big fan of podcasts. I really like to write and to read. And so that's what I do for my audience. And I have short posts on Instagram, but I also have really long blog posts as well on my website. So yeah, people who like to read short posts or long posts, they have their option. People who want to watch videos can also see that on Instagram and also on Facebook. There are also some companies that host events like this one or like in-person events. And then there's also forums like Reddit, as Matt said. So I think as we continue to talk more about finance, we need to, pay attention to what people like to do, how they engage, and continue doing all sorts of different methods of engaging with them.
Yeah, I'll probably span between the two. Earlier, although I think it has to be more about learning. Learning's important. There's lots of different ways that people learn, as Sophia said. Learning in itself isn't sustainable. There has to be action. So if I was thinking about it, it was what's stopping people from participating. Is it, things like limits, minimums? Is it jargon? Fear, branding, all these sorts of things. So, ask people what's stopping them from interacting with your products and services, and you'll have a good idea of what barriers, either hard or soft, are in the way, because you actually need the education and the behaviour in order for there to be a sustainable change, in literacy and people's wealth.
Thank you, Matt, Lee, and Sophia. So that brings us to the end. I am going to pass back to Kirk now, just to close out.
Thanks, Meagan, and thanks to all our speakers, Lee McCauley, Sophia Golfinopoulos, and Matt Macpherson. Hopefully people online got some really great tips, thoughts, and assistance in the way that they're thinking about how to engage with what is becoming an increasingly diverse customer base and societal base in New Zealand. So thank you for joining us. Just a couple of points. We've got some events that I'm just going to quickly talk about for you. We've got a life insurance networking event, our special interest group, on the 10th of December. That's from 10:30 till 12:30 at EY in Auckland, again on the 10th of December. And just to give you a bit of a heads up, we've got our Outlook 2025 confirmed for the Tuesday, the 4th of February. That's a breakfast, 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. at the Hilton. We've got the Honourable Andrew Bailey, Minister for Consumer Affairs and Commerce, Samantha Barris, Chief Executive of the FMA, and Brad Olson, who's the Chief Executive and Principal Economist for Infometrics, to talk to the audience about what they are thinking about and what they expect to see in 2025. So thanks again for joining this webinar. Thanks again to our panellists, and thanks again to Meagan, our facilitator for today's event, and also to, of course, the wonderful Nidhi. Thanks to the FSC team too. Thanks.